Hi, my name is Holly. I'm a manager here at Edison Ford Winter Estates, and I do a program each month called a digital discussion. And today we're doing the Minnesota Twins. Now, why are we doing them? Well, because they're one of the teams that came here since Terry Park is open. We've had three new ballparks, and they were the people to start it off. So I'll tell you a little bit about their interesting history as the Washington Senators. And it's 100 years since spring training began here in Fort Myers in 1925 when the Athletics showed up. I've already done things from the past on the Athletics, on Connie Mack, or Umberto Clemente. Next month will be on 100 years of baseball. And please don't leave before the end because we have an important thing that you can come to free where you maybe even can win prizes, do some trivia, and so on. So here I am in front of the spring training home of the Minnesota Twins. And let's get started. So there's the ballpark there. And in the last 10 years or so, they've made incredible changes because you used to be sitting just on, like the bleachers were metal bleachers, and you could get really cozy with your neighbor. They've done a lot of things, and it is a lovely ballpark. So this is the history and the spring training history of the Minnesota Twins. There were three separate American League, National League franchises that have played under that name. And yes, we'll get to the Twins part, but we have to go back in their history, going back to the 19th century. And there's one of the teams. One of those clubs is gone and no longer exists, while the other two are playing in different cities and under different names. And none of the three franchises, once called the Senators, is related to the current Nationals. So it gets a little confusing. And that, for some reason, I didn't put that in the right order. The first Senators were part of the American Association, which existed before there was American League. That was 1891, and the American League starts in 1901. Then they were under the National League, 1892 to 1899. They played at Boundary Field, and they had a bunch of different names. In 1891, they're known as the Statesmen. From 1892 to 1899, they're known as the Washington Senators, and this will keep on going, different names that they've had as the Washington team. And they were also periodically referred to as the Washington Nationals, which of course is today's team. And they were owned by somebody named Earl Wagner from 1892 to 1899. And they were a pretty horrible team. And they were actually, when they were called baseball, two separate words, clubs. Let me just tell you a little bit about that team. When spring training starts, like this is a Washington team, the Washington Senators, he's going to bring his team. They would go to different places in the country. They might go to Texas. They might go to Alabama. They might go to Arkansas. Well, one year he decides to bring his team to Jacksonville. And this only is just one of those kind of vague connections to do with Washington, but I thought you'd find it interesting because it also tells the story of Connie Mack, who comes here in 1925 as the manager of the Philadelphia Athletics. Early spring training, one of the most, and this is from a book called Under the March Sun, one of the most detailed accounts of early spring training comes from Connie Mack. He was a 25-year-old catcher with the Washington Senators. And they had to share rooms on Pullman cars for the trip, and 14 players slept two to a bunk in a train car for the ride, for how long it took to get from Washington to Jacksonville. Moreover, the players were rousted from their berths at 7 in the morning and moved to a day coach so that their owner manager could save a few more pennies. And just as what Max says, by the time we arrived in Jacksonville, 4 of the 14 players were reasonably sober. The rest were fully drunk, totally drunk. And when they arrived in Jacksonville, they sobered up by schlepping their luggage on foot from the train station to the hotel that he had booked for them. But when the manager saw, let me put this in my own words, that they were a baseball team, their reputation was terrible. And guess what? They were turned away. They were turned away at every hotel because that's the reputation of baseball players. That then, remember, their name is the Washington Senators. That's where Connie Mack gets his start. And so he finally found a boarding house on the outskirts of town where for $1 a day for a player, they would provide food and two to a bed sleeping accommodations for the players as so long as they agreed not to mingle with the other guests. Now, today, if you had a baseball player staying at your they wouldn't be in a boarding house, but yeah, your hotel, you would be pretty excited. The best though, even under those circumstances, because they had a fight every night and they broke a lot of furniture. And that is why baseball players probably weren't welcome at most places. So remember, this is one of the first Senators teams. So after that team, the short life of the other team that I told you about in the late 1800s, we go ahead to 1901 to 1904. And there's the Senators, and then 1905 to 1955, the Nationals. The Senators was commonly referred to as the Senators throughout its history, and unofficially as the Griffs, because they were owned by somebody named Clark Griffin. The name Nationals only appear on uniforms for 2 seasons and was replaced with the W logo. The names Senators, Nationals, and shorter Nats were used interchangeably, so it's really hard to track their history. The latter two names were revived for the current National League franchise that had previously played in Montreal. So the team we have today from Washington took the place of the Montreal Expos. But you'll find out that Washington has a convoluted history. So we had the Senators supposedly from 1901 to 1904, 1905 to 1955, the Nationals, and then 1956 to 60, the Senators again. It gets complicated. The Washington Senators were an American League team, and their ballpark was built in 1911 and it lasted till 1960, and that was Griffith Stadium in D.C. They were established as a team. This particular team in 1901, and they're going to relocate to Minneapolis, Minnesota, and become the Minnesota Twins. They have the nickname the Griffs after Clark Griffin, their owner, and the Nats, 1905 to 1955. They're going to win one World Series in 1924. They win the American League pennant in 1924, 1925, and 1933. They also known as the Washington Nationals, and they played in the American League Park from 1901 to 1903. They also played at Boundary Field, and their colors were red, white, and blue. And they've only got 2 retired numbers. Clark Griffin managed to own them from 1920 to 1955, and then his nephew, adopted son, Calvin, did from 1955 to 1960. There's a list of their managers. I'll talk about a little more about them, but probably the best known are Walter Johnson and Joe Cronin. And I'll tell you a little more about them in a minute, but let's get into this a little more. Now, from 1911 to 1933, the Senators were one of the most successful franchises in Major League Baseball. The team's rosters included Baseball Hall of Fame members Goose Goslin, Sam Rice, Joe Cronin, Bucky Harris, Heine Manish, and one of the greatest players and pitchers of all time, Walter Johnson. Probably doesn't get the recognition he deserves today. But the Senators, unfortunately, are remembered more for their many years of mediocrity, including 6 last-place finishes in the 1940s and 50s. Joe Judge, Cecil Travis, Buddy Meyer, Roy Stivers, and Eddie Yost were other notable Senators players whose careers were spent in obscurity due to the team's lack of success. So honestly, you attract more attention if you're on a successful team. The Washington Senators had an overall win-loss record, oh dear, 4,223 to 4,864. So it was a 0.465, 40, roughly 47% wins. And I don't know if you can tell in this picture, but that's at in DC, and that's Franklin Roosevelt there. So the National League is long established before the American League, but it declared itself a major league in 1901. And the new league moved the previous minor Western League's Kansas City Blues, that was for a time the Western League, to Washington, a city that had been abandoned by the older National League a year earlier. They had left the team. The new Washington club, like the old one, was called Senators, the second of 3 franchises to hold the name. A little confusing. And Jim Manning moved with the Kansas City club to manage the first Senators team. But Senators began their history as a consistently losing team. This is great. At times, they were so inept that San Francisco Chronicle columnist Charlie Dresden famously joked, Washington, first in war, first in peace, and last in the American League. And that's a play on words about George Washington's eulogy, which was first in war, first in peace, and first in the hearts of his countrymen. Okay, they weren't that beloved. The 1904 Senators lost 113 games, and the next season, the team's owners, trying for a fresh start, changed the team's names to the Nationals and occasionally nicknamed the Nats. However, this is what's confusing. The Senators' name remains widely used, and yes, they are going to become the Twins, by the way. In fact, the two names were used interchangeably, although the Nats remain the team's nickname. The Senators' name was officially restored in 1956. Confusing. The club continued to lose despite the addition of a talented 19-year-old pitcher named Walter Johnson in 1907. Raised in rural Kansas, Johnson was a tall, lanky man with long arms, using a leisurely windup and an unusual sidearm, which is always fun to watch a sidearm delivery, threw the ball faster than anyone had ever seen. Johnson's breakout year was 1910, and when he struck out 313 batters, posted an earned run average of 1 3600ths, won 25 games for a losing ball club. Over his 21-year Hall of Fame career, so you can go see his plaque there today, Johnson, nicknamed the Big Train, won 417 games and struck out 3,508 batters, a major league record that stood for more than 50 years. But guess what? Yes, I know. They didn't get the attention they deserved because they were not a good team. He didn't get the attention they deserved. From 1911 to 1924, the Senators had a series of up and downs, mediocrity, but in 1924, they became the world champions, which pretty much was a miracle. In 1924, Griffith named 27-year-old second baseman Bucky Harris, player manager, led by the hitting of Goose Goslin and Sam Rice and a solid pitching staff, headlined by the 36-year-old Johnson. The Senators captured, so he got one title there, the American League pennant, 2 games ahead of Babe Ruth and the New York Yankees. The Senators faced John McGraw's heavily favored New York Giants, and that man was tough, in the 1924 World Series. Despite Johnson losing both of his starts, the Senators kept pace to tie the series at 3 games apiece and force a Game 7. The Senators trailed the Giants 3-1 in the 8th inning of Game 7, and when Bucky Harris took a routine ground ball to third, which hit a pebble, runners scored on the play, tying the score at 3. In the 9th inning, with the game tied, Harris brought in an aging Johnson to pitch on just 1 day's rest. So how do you think he did? He had been the losing pitcher in Game 5, and Johnson held the Giants scoreless in extra innings. In the bottom of the 12th inning, Manny Ruel hit a high foul ball near home plate. The Giants catcher, Hank Gowdy, dropped his mask to field the ball, but failing to toss the mask aside, he tripped over it and dropped the ball, thus giving Ruel another chance to bat. On the next pitch, Ruel hit a double and then proceeded to score the winning run when Earl McNeely hit a ground ball that took another bad hop over Lidstrom's head. It was the only World Series triumph for the franchise during their 60-year in Washington. I guess there's teams that haven't won anything, so there's that. Now here's somebody. And this is Joe Cronin. And you can tell that he goes into the Hall of Fame as a Boston player. He starts out with Pittsburgh, and then he is with Washington for 7 years, and then he is with Boston for 11. And here's his plaque from the Hall of Fame, named the All-Star Shortstop, 7 seasons. I mean, he's amazing. He manages the Senators as well. The Senators repeated as the American League champions, but lost the World Series to the Pittsburgh Pirates. After Johnson's retirement in 1927, the Senators endured a few losing seasons until returning to contention in 1930, this time with Johnson as manager. But the Senators finished third in 1931 and 32 behind Philadelphia and New York. And then Griffith fires Johnson. In 1933, the new manager, 26-year-old shortstop Joe Cronin, became player manager. The change worked. They don't have player managers today, but back in the day, they used to, as the Washington posted a 99-53 record and swept the pennant 7 games ahead of the Yankees. But then what happens? But the Senators lost the World Series to the Giants in 5 games. And after that, they would not host, Washington, D.C. does not host another World Series until 2019, when the Washington Nationals defeated the Houston Astros. And what do you think of that? They defeated the Houston Astros. Anyway, he was a great manager, great player. Now, what is this? Why do I have something that with a woman in a dance costume saying "damn Yankees"? Well, we'll get to that because we're getting to the story of when they get here, what they do here when they're established as a team. But I wanted to give you the complete history. In the fall of 1953, the second major baseball franchise shift of the 20th century took place after the Boston Braves moved to Milwaukee in 1952. And then, of course, eventually they'll become Atlanta, with long-suffering Baltimore civic and business interests purchasing the St. Louis Browns for the controversial but enterprising Bill Veeck. I hope I said that right. Moving them 40 miles, 65 kilometers northeast of Washington to the Chesapeake Bay Port City. And the Browns moved. And he is controversial because he'll do things like he got somebody that was very small of stature to pitch. He would do gimmicks all the time. He was not necessarily revered by everybody in baseball. In the spring of 1954, the former Northeastern City Collegiate Football and replacing the early minor league level AAA, sometimes named the Birds of the International League, where they've been champions since 1910. The additional competition in the same league for Maryland and Virginia area baseball fans added to the complexion around the nation's capital for the rest of the 1950s, as the new Baltimore Orioles built their team's prospects with astute trades and farm system output during the rest of the decade, becoming pennant contenders. So like they're vying for their piece of the pie, Baltimore, along with Washington. They're very close. They're located near each other. So they take some of the fan base away. They continued their winning ways as one of the most dominant teams in professional baseball for the next 2 decades. The Orioles did, formerly known as the lackluster St. Louis Browns, overpowering even the hapless third Senators franchise, 1961 to 1971. Isn't that crazy how many franchises they had? The Senators, unfortunately, were also the butt of many national jokes during the 1950s. And this is why, with the debut and running of a Broadway musical in 1955 in New York City called Damn Yankees, based on an earlier best-selling novel and movie in 1958, which follows a hapless elderly, I don't think mature, we'll put, fan becoming a Faustian or devil's bargain, but he sells his soul to transform the team by becoming a young, powerful new Senators player, played in the movie by a heartthrob leading man, Tab Hunter, and leading the lowly team to a pennant versus the Yankees. So he sells, and there's Gwen Verdon, and she plays like a, what would you say, like a temptress for the devil. And so that's why they were kind of made fun of, because the team was so bad. They made a movie about them having to sell your soul to the devil to get them to beat the Yankees. In 1954, Senators Farm System Director signed, Ossie Bluidge signed 17-year-old Harmon Killebrew because of this $30,000 signing bonus, an enormous amount at that time. Baseball rules required Killebrew to spend the rest of the 1954 season with the Senators as a bonus baby. And I got this from Wikipedia. Killebrew bounced between the Senators and the minor leagues for the next few years, and then he became their regular third baseman in 1959, leading the league with 42 home runs and earning a spot on the home run American League All-Star team. And this is a play, and I always enjoy it. Damn Yankees. So if you haven't heard it, seen it, might be worth watching. The Minnesota Twins have held spring trainings. Washington Senators have held spring trainings in the following locations, and I will let you know how they become the Minnesota Twins. They started out, and I hope I'm saying this right, Phoebus, Virginia, then Washington, D.C., 1902 to 4, Hampton, Virginia. That's not going to be till after World War II that places stay consistent. But Galveston, Texas, Norfolk, Virginia, Atlanta, Charlottesville, and you didn't even know how many teams there were going to be for you to play against. 1912 to 1916, Atlanta, Augusta, Georgia, Tampa from 1920 to 1929, Biloxi, Mississippi, and then they are in Orlando from 1936 to 1942. And pretty much they're in Orlando for a very long time, except during the war years from 43 through 45, they were not allowed to travel. They had to stay east of the Mississippi, fairly near where they were located. And so they trained in College Park, Maryland, which would have been a real blast during the winter, huh? And then they go back to Orlando. So with the exception of those 3 years, they are in Orlando from 1936 to 1990. But we snagged them in 1991. And there is what was called Tinker Field in Orlando when it was relatively new at the time. It doesn't look like much today, but I'm sure it was considered very modern at the time. When Clark Griffin died, the man who owned the team, died in 1955, his nephew and adopted son took over the team presidency. And what he does is he sells Griffith Stadium, where they have been playing, to the city of Washington and leased it back, leading to a speculation that the team was planning to move as the Boston Braves, St. Louis Brown, and Philadelphia Athletics had done in the early 50s. And the New York Giants and Brooklyn Dodgers were due later in a decade. And the Athletics probably is going to hold the record for the team that moves the most, by the way, since they're going to be heading to Las Vegas. But right now they're going to be in Sacramento. After an early flirtation with San Francisco with a AAA Pacific Coast League team, the San Francisco Seals, by 1957, Griffith was courting Minneapolis, St. Paul, in the upper Midwest state of Minnesota, a prolonged process that resulted in his rejecting the Twin Cities' first offer before agreeing to relocate. The American League opposed the move at first, but in 1960, in the face of the Continental League's proposed Minnesota franchise, have you ever heard of the Continental League? Didn't last. The deal was reached. The Senators moved and were replaced with an expansion Senators team for 1961. So this is Clark Griffith. He was associated with Major League Baseball for more than 50 years. This is his plaque in the Hall of Fame, and served as a member of Chicago and Cincinnati teams in the National League and the Chicago, New York, and Washington clubs. And there he is. But this is from Wikipedia. So this is what happens. They're going to go to Minnesota in 1961, become the Twins. But yet there in 1961, there is also a new organization, a new Washington Senators, which is kind of silly, don't you think? And by the way, they will become World Series champions the year they move here in 1991. And they played Game 7 in the Metrodome, and it was one for the record books. It was spectacular. They had players, Jack Morris, whose pitching was so good, Kirby Puckett, the only player with the Twins his entire career right there, Dave Winfield, Jim Thome, and Paul Molitor. And there is the 1991 World Series, Twins and Braves. There's the ring, and that is the only year that he will play for the Twins. He is a Tigers. Jack Morris plays a lot for the Tigers. He's also a baseball announcer. He is part of the Hall of Fame. But I mean, that was a lights out, spectacular pitching duel and their very first year here. They had, I believe, also won a World Series in 1987. So how do we end up with them and what happens? Well, let me go back a little bit. See if I can go back here for a minute, and back here and back right there. So the Twins had a spring training history of their own. Their field was Tinker Field, and it was named after a legendary Chicago Cubs shortstop named Joe Tinker. And as you know, they were there for a long time, but it definitely needed an upgrade. It was pretty rough. And they're looking for a new place to go in Florida. And Orlando is considered in the center of the state, so they have a good location. Where Fort Myers is kind of off by themselves. And Tinkerfield, Orlando, people go there by the tens and hundreds of thousands. And so, but the remoteness of Fort Myers, well, guess what? Lots of Midwesterners come down here and lots of people from Minnesota. And so Lee County is going to want to make something that people will want to visit when they're down here. So it is a 7-game, by the way, World Series in 1991. And Kirby Puckett helps force the game 6. Game 7, somebody gets the winning home run, but it's all about this pitching duel here. Well, let's go on just a little bit. So there, the Washington is gone. They become the Twins, and they are going to be coming down here to Fort Myers, which is a little remote compared to Orlando, but the county is willing to build them what they want and need at the time. So in 1961, we know we get the Twins, but the nation's capital was given an expansion franchise, which was also named the Washington Senators, which made no sense to me at all. So they get that name. And I'm just going to talk about them a little bit because I like Ted Williams, though I don't know. That wasn't the best team ever. The expansion Senators held spring training camp at Pompano Beach, Florida, for their entire time they were in Washington. They were the Washington Senators, 11 years, and when they became the Texas Rangers, which is another 15 years. And there is Ted Williams at spring training, and he's got the Senators. So you saw what Tinkerfield looked like. They did have some upgrades, but nothing that would look like this. And this is their stadium, Hammond Stadium, which I always thought the water fountain here is very spectacular. And if you look at the entrance and the steeple there, it is supposed to evoke a feel, a little bit of Churchill Downs, where the Kentucky Derby is held. So this is what happens. This is built in 1991 for the Twins. It's called Hammond Stadium, and league held sports complex. At one point, it was named CenturyLink. They trained in Orlando except the war years. They were originally the Washington Senators. The complex included 9,300 seats, Hammond Stadium, and 5 other full-size fields, and infield 4 softball fields. The Twins Player Development Academy. They do bring in people from other countries and work with them, and dorms for international prospects. This is also the home of the Mighty Mussels, which used to be the Fort Myers Miracle, Class A Florida State League, and the Florida Complex League Twins, the rookie level affiliate, which nobody even knows about. And they made major improvements. Once they built a new stadium for the Red Sox, even though there was time on the contract, they knew they needed to step it up, and they made major improvements. It really is a lovely ballpark. They replaced the seats. Sometimes it's just a little toasty, so make sure if you have problems with the sun, you stay under cover there. And when they made this originally, this first stadium, there was 7,500 seats, which was a lot more than most stadiums had. They were like 5,000. And they wanted to make everything, Lee County agreed to make everything with flair and style. And that first year they were there, they sold out every seat. It's got that has like a promenade. They've got the fountains. Every road is named after a famous player there. It was a pretty nice place and undertaking. And this is in 1991. I'm going to go back for a minute because I don't think I talked about this. How did we end up with them? Well, we have teams at Terry Park. We have the Athletics. Then we have the Cleveland Indians. They're not there long, but the Athletics win 2 World Series. Pittsburgh comes after the Indians. They win World Series. And then Kansas City Royals. And the Kansas City Royals, I believe, are there for 19 years at Terry Park. But Terry Park, which still has people go there, to play college games or Roy Hobbs senior games. But it was outdated, and they needed a new ballpark. And Kansas City wanted to stay. But for some reason, the county and the city, and I don't have an answer why, didn't want to do that at the time. And I think the manager at the time said, "You're going to build a ballpark for somebody. Why shouldn't it be us?" And I'm not sure why they wouldn't build them a new one, because they are, I mean, from 1925 into the 80s, that ballpark had served its purpose. It's still there today. It's historic. It's great, but they needed something new. But nope, they wouldn't do it for the Royals. So then there was no baseball from like 1988 until 1991. But then for some reason, they agreed to build a ballpark for the Twins. And it took off like hotcakes, and they gave them whatever they wanted. All games were selling out, and they do great that first year in Lee County. They win the World Series. That's unbelievable. And of course, they wanted to keep him here. So we have, and by the way, the numbers that they had going to the games once they moved to Fort Myers were incredible. And yeah, we are a little bit off the beaten path, but now we have two teams here. And the Twins are the first one to get their own stadium that wasn't Terry Park. So in 2005, the newest Major League Baseball, I just like to talk about how many names for the Washington Senators Nationals they can have, made their spring training home in Vera, Florida, and the team played their spring training home games at the Space Coast Stadium until 2016. And then they began spring training at the ballpark of the Palm Beaches, West Palm Beach in 2017. So that doesn't have anything to do with the Twins, but it just tells you all about the how many different things named Washington Senators Nationals took place. It gets a little confusing. So let me tell you a little bit more about the Twins, because I think they've done some good things. They don't have a ton of people in the Hall of Fame that went in as a Twin, but I think they're on the right track. So this is some things that's if you go to the Baseball Hall of Fame's website, and I'm sure I gave them credit for this, you can find the starting nines, different artifacts to do with the team, different facts about the team. So this is a jersey from Johan Santana, and it's he's a Cy Young winner, and he wore this jersey in 2006, the year he won pitching's Triple Crown, leading both leagues in wins, ERA, and strikeout. He capped the year by unanimously being named the American League Cy Young Award winner, the greatest honor for pitchers. And that's his jersey right there. And that says Viva Baseball, which means that's the section of the Hall of Fame you can find it in. And I would encourage you, if you haven't visited the Hall of Fame, I don't get anything for saying this, to go and visit it because it's spectacular. And of course, we have a little spring training exhibit. I'm going to tell you about it just a minute. So here's the game. In Game 7 of the 1991 World Series, Twins ace Jack Morris, the only year he's with his team, took the mound and refused to be relieved. Sometimes that backfires, like Pedro Martinez in 2003. But we won't talk about that because Morris does great. He pitches all 10 innings in Minnesota's 1-0 shutout victory over Atlanta. And Atlanta had great pitching too. Morris used this ball during that extraordinary feat, completing baseball's first ever worst to first finish. So in 1990, they had been in last place. Look at it now. And if you want to find that, it's in the whole new ball game. And if you can't get to the state, Cooperstown right away, go online. They have tons of things for you to look at here. And this is John Roush, and he's the 6'11" player for the Twins. He's a relief pitcher, and no major leaguer in history has stood taller than the Twins relief pitcher, John Roush, an imposing figure on the mound. I would hate to stand next to him. He's almost 2 feet taller than me. I'm sure it would be fine, but it would be a little intimidating. The 6'11" Roush wore this Twins uniform in 2010, the season in which his team leading 21 saves helped Minnesota to the American League Central title. And that is in one for the books. And there's the gentleman, by the way, I talked about Bill Veeck from that owned the St. Louis Browns. That's the guy he put in to pitch. He was really into gimmicks. And this one, Gene Larkin, World Series winning baseball. This baseball is the series winner for the 1991 Twins. With the bases loaded in Game 7 of the 1991 World Series, Minnesota DH Gene Larkin drove this ball to left center field for a walk-off, scoring Dan Gladden and returning the Commissioner's Trophy to the Twin Cities for the second time in 4 years. Yeah, they had won in 87. This is called Autumn Glory. And he gets the run, and he was great, but you know what? It's all about Jack Morris, I have to be honest. And here's a relatively new addition to the Hall of Fame. Joe Mauer, who I have seen play in spring training. That's his 2000 hit helmet on April 12th, 2018. And 2018 will be the last year that he plays for the Twins. Minnesota first baseman Joe Mauer recorded his 2000 career hit while wearing this helmet. The three-time batting champ reached the milestone with a 2-run single, ensuring Minnesota's 4-0 win over the White Sox. And that's in the section called New Inductees. And all these are from the Hall of Fame. I want to make sure that I give them credit. And here we go here. As I said, they don't have a lot of players of their own, but oops, let me go back here. Dave Winfield signed a 2-year, $5.2 million free agent contract with the Minnesota Twins. Now, he had been a Yankees player, but he wants to return to his home team. Winfield, a St. Paul native, turned down several more lucrative offers to play for his hometown team. Who else do we have? But he doesn't go in as a Twin. He goes in as a Yankee. St. Paul native Paul Molitor played for the Twins from 1996 to 1998, coached from 2000 to 2001 and 2004, and managed 2015 to 2018. I think he actually wins Manager of the Year, and he actually goes into the Hall of Fame as a Milwaukee Brewer. So just to give you the idea, I mean, they're not a big market team. They don't have a ton of money, but I think they've done well with what they have, and maybe someday they'll go back to the Hall. And here's probably one of the most beloved players that ever played for the Twins. This is Kirby Puckett, and that's his plaque. A 6-time Gold Glove Award winner, Puckett was named to 10 consecutive All-Star teams from 1986 to 1995 and was named MVP of the All-Star Game in 1993. He finished in the top 10 in MVP voting 7 times during his 12-year career. Puckett's career was cut short because of retina damage in his right eye, ending his playing days following the 1995 season. But yes, he did play down here for the Twins. And yes, he goes into the Hall as a Twin. He finished with a .318 batting average, 414 doubles, 207 home runs, and 1,085 runs batted in, and 1,783 games. He was elected to the Hall of Fame in 2001, and he passed away on March 6, 2006. And it's a shame that he had to give up his career when he did. And it said, few men have played the game of baseball with the enthusiasm of Kirby Puckett. And as I said, go check out that website there. And this is Jim Thome, and he played for the Twins in 2010, 2011, and he went in under the name for Cleveland 2018. And today they can even decide not to go in as a specific team. This is a big one that they let get away. Thank you very much, Twins, because he came to the Red Sox. Ortiz played for the Twins 1997 to 2002. And yes, he was down here playing for the Fort Myers Miracle. And the Twins had let him go. And he ran into Pedro Martinez, who picked up the phone and called Red Sox, and the rest is history. But there he is, what he would have looked like when he was playing for the Twins. And he went in to the Hall of Fame for the Red Sox in 2022, which I got to see that induction. Joe Mauer, I've gotten to see him play. He's been a more recent player, and he was with the Twins from 2004 to 2018. He was inducted last year in 2024, and he went in as a Twin as well. So there is somebody else there. All right, let me tell you something. We are so lucky that we are in an area where we have 2 teams we can watch. Other teams come down nearby. Charlotte County has spring training up there for the Rays. There's Northport where you can see the Braves. There's so many teams. Today it's a lot easier to commute, and it's worth going. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed hearing about the Twins. I give them a lot of respect. They got the first stadium built for them. And next month, I am going to be talking about 100 years of baseball in Fort Myers, 100 years of spring training. And it's historic because it brings sports writers here. It engages Thomas Edison, and I hope you'll come and see it. But celebrate 100 years of spring training on February 20th from 6 to 8. It's a free evening of family fun for baseball fanatics. And even if you aren't a fanatic, you can become one. Join us in celebrating the centennial of the first Fort Myers spring training. Explore our fanatics exhibit, enjoy kids' activities, mascot photos. We know we've got at least one. I think we might have a lot more, and grab a chance to win baseball tickets and other great prizes. And almost every prize is free. We'll have some food trucks, we'll have trivia, we'll have raffles. You get to go in and see the spring training exhibit, and that's something we always hope to build on for free. The only ticket that we're going to be selling is a raffle ticket for jerseys signed by a very prestigious player. So come prepared for that, but otherwise everything is free, and I hope you'll show up. And these are some of my sources, and there is a great book called Under the March Sun, The Story of Spring Training. And I said to the Hall of Fame, would you please do an exhibit on spring training? Because they have exhibits on cereal boxes. And finally I got somebody to say, well, it's a good idea, but we've got all these other things ahead of you. But I still think it's worthy of a mention, and how it changes the course of the towns that it goes to, and how much we owe Connie Mack and the pharmacists that originally got them to come here and change the course of history. So I hope you'll join me on the 18th when we talk about that. It's a big month. We've got all kinds of events coming up. Look at our member magazine. And thank you. And I will see you next month.